What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. I know I've been away for a while. I was a little short in ideas, but anyway, I know you don't want to listen to me blabber on about how I couldn't come up with any ideas, so let's get into the video. Now, the topic of today, if you did not read the title and just looked at the thumbnail, is that I just yesterday got a $100 medium telephoto to telephoto lens for my Canon T5i. Now, the reason I'm making a video on this is because honestly, I want to think about $100 for, what is this, 75 to 300 millimeters on my APS-C sensor. That's going to be 113 to 450 millimeters. Now, the only disadvantage to this lens, I would say, is that it doesn't really have an image stabilizer, so you have to either use a tripod or just have really steady hands. And I'm going to be comparing this lens to other newer lenses that have image stabilizers but with less focal lengths, and they could be EF or EFS. So that's going to be mainly what I'm going to be going over about this lens. So the first thing I want to do in this video is go over the specs of this lens right here. So it's specs time. This has a minimum focus distance of 1.5 meters / 5 feet. It is 75 to 300 millimeters on a full frame camera, 113 to 450 on an APS-C camera with a 1.6 times crop factor. No image stabilization. It's an EF lens, not EFS. The filter size is 58 millimeters. The minimum aperture range is 4 to 5.6. This is the third version of this lens. The first version came out in March of 1991. This one came out in April of 1999. So it's about 8 years newer than the first version. As I said, no image stabilization. EF. That's about all the specs I can think of. So now that I went over a few pros and cons, I want to compare this to other lenses. Now they don't have to necessarily be similar like telephoto, but I'm going to be comparing lenses of different focal lengths, lenses with still no image stabilizer, and see how the results turn out. So anyway, here I've obviously got the 75 to 300 millimeter lens, and I've also got a 50 millimeter lens 1.8. Now, a huge advantage to this lens is that you can open this up all the way to 1.8, which allows you to have a faster shutter speed. This only goes at all the way zoomed out, 75 millimeters. It only does f4, but it's a big zoom lens, so lots of moving parts inside it, and it can't help it. 300 millimeters, this does 5.6. Pretty good, honestly. I can go with that. F4 is kind of golden aperture kind of thing. F3.5, that's pretty good, and that's pretty close to 3.5, which is letting in a decent amount of light. But when you're shooting at 1.8, f1.8, you're going to let in a lot of light, fast shutter speed. That's going to kind of cancel out no image stabilization. And honestly, there's a lens like this is going to have a much shorter minimum focus distance. This is actually 1.1 feet, since this thing is 5 feet. It's like you have to be you can be 5 times closer to your subject than you can be with this lens. And I think that's a really big advantage, because if you're shooting with this 50 mil and you're 1.1 feet away, it's about 300 millimeters shooting. If you're comparing it to this thing is 5 feet away at 300 millimeters. This thing is about a foot away at 50 millimeters. It's about the same if you're shooting on a full frame sensor. But honestly, I think if you got this lens, you probably have a less expensive camera. Now, don't let me be rude or anything, assuming like you're cheap and you thought this was just like a cheap lens. But I think that most people shooting on an APS-C sensor would most likely get this lens instead of a more expensive version. Now, the second and last lens I can accurately compare this to is the 18 to 135 millimeter lens produced by Canon. Now, a few differences between these lenses. Obviously, the focal length, 18 to 135 EFS. This is EF, so it's full frame APS-C. Now, I wanted to compare these two because the 18 to 135 actually has a minimum focus distance of 1.5 feet. This is 5 feet. So, let's think here. It's about 3 times closer you can focus at. And I think, so 3 times closer. 450 on that F lens. It's about 415 millimeters relative to the position of each lens, which honestly, that's pretty good. But I think I'd still use this in pretty much every situation where I need to get super close. So, here it goes. Final opinion on this lens. Whether you should buy it or not, for $100. Now, I would say, as long as you're fine, if you don't have kind of like hand shakiness, or you don't really know techniques and you're fine with carrying around a tripod, definitely take this lens. If you got still hands and you know how to keep your camera steady, go for it. If you don't like either of those, excuse me, well, find something else to buy. This is $100. I bet you can find some lens better for $100. Something Yongnuo, perhaps, not even name brand. I mean, this lens right here, the 50mm 1.8. Young Nua makes a version of that. That's $50. This thing is like $140, which is cheap on a big scale, but really saving $90 about, it's a pretty big deal. Anyway, back to this one. I like this lens. I don't know about you. Leave a like on this video if you like the lens. Leave a comment telling me if you want this lens, or if you didn't, what lens would you get instead for $100? And actually, let's go $200 because the list price for this on Canon.com is $200. What would you get with $200 instead of this? And that's all I have to say. So I'll see you next time on Camera Mania.